Esther Chapter 6, Through the Bible, Part 2. When Haman walks into the king's presence, he is greeted with the question, "What shall be done unto the man whom the king delighteth to honor?" Haman thought the king was talking about him. After all, he had been made prime minister. He had been given the ring of the king. He had paid a certain sum of money, true, but he was able to get permission to exterminate the Jewish people in toto, and certainly there is no one else in the kingdom that he can think of that the king would delight to honor. But the king was thinking of Mordecai. And Haman answered the king, "For the man whom the king delighteth to honor, let the royal apparel be brought which the king useth to wear, and the horse that the king rideth upon, and the crown royal which is set upon his head. And let this apparel and horse be delivered to the hand of one of the king's most noble princes, that they may array the man withal whom the king delighteth to honor, and bring him on horseback through the street of the city, and proclaim before him, Thus shall it be done to the man whom the king delighteth to honor." Esther 6 verse 7-9. The true nature of Haman is revealed in his answer. I am sure you can see what is in his heart. Haman had his eye upon the throne. It was his intention, when the time was right, to eliminate the king. That is the story of the Persian monarchs anyway. It was difficult for a man to stay on the throne very long. Even in Israel's history, as recorded in 1st and 2nd Kings, if it were not so tragic, it would be humorous to see how short a time some of the kings ruled. Some of them only made it through 2 months. When a king sat on his throne and looked around him, he didn't know who was his friend and who was his enemy. He couldn't imagine because he realized that any man who was lifted up would attempt to slay him in order that he might become king. Obviously, this was in the heart of Haman. Haman was thinking, "To whom would the king delight to do honor more than to myself? You let me have the apparel of the king, put the crown on my head, let me ride the king's horse, let it be announced by a herald when I go through the streets." What is he doing? Haman is preparing the people for the day when the crown and the royal apparel will be his. I am of the opinion that the king would suspect this type of thing, for he recognized that Haman was thinking of himself and certainly not of Mordecai. Then the king said to Haman, "Make haste, and take the apparel and the horse, as thou hast said, and do even so to Mordecai the Jew, that sitteth at the king's gate. Let nothing fail of all that thou hast spoken." Esther 6 verse 10. There was nothing that could have been asked of Haman that would have been more displeasing, more ignominious, or more distasteful than to put the royal garments on Mordecai, put him on the king's horse, and lead him through the streets proclaiming that this is the man that the king delighted to honor. To accord him this honor was mortification beyond words to Haman. He hated Mordecai. Then took Haman the apparel and the horse, and arrayed Mordecai, and brought him on horseback through the street of the city, and proclaimed before him, "Thus shall it be done unto the man whom the king delighteth to honor." Esther 6 verse 11. Instead of leading Mordecai through the streets in honor, Haman had intended to hang him on the gallows. The humiliation of Haman at this point is absolutely unspeakable. You can imagine the feeling that he had as he led this horse, with the man who would not bow to him seated on it, through the street. He had a gallows at home, 75 feet high, on which to hang him. And Mordecai came again to the king's gate. But Haman hasted to his house mourning, and having his head covered, and Haman told Zeresh his wife and all his friends everything that had befallen him. Then said his wise men and Zeresh his wife unto him, "If Mordecai be of the seed of the Jews, before whom thou hast begun to fall, thou shalt not prevail against him, but shalt surely fall before him." And while they were yet talking with him, came the king's chamberlains, and hasted to bring Haman unto the banquet that Esther had prepared. Esther 6 verse 12-14. Finally the ordeal was over. Mordecai returned to the king's gate. But Haman hurried to his house, mourning, and having his head covered. Shame beyond shame. He told his wife and friends everything that had happened. Zeresh was a nice little wife, was she not? She suggested that the gallows be built, and now she is telling Haman, "I told you so." You're beginning to fall. It is not exactly comforting to have your wife and friends suggest that probably tomorrow will be your last day. Things are happening thick and fast. Haman no sooner gets home and explains to his wife and his wise men what had happened than there is a knock at the door. The king's servants tell Haman to hurry up. The banquet is ready that he had promised to attend. He had looked forward to this dinner, you remember, and had boasted about the fact that he was the only one whom the queen had invited with the king to attend her banquet. He is going to be late for the dinner that he had been looking forward to, but the events were taking place so fast he couldn't keep up with them. Things are beginning to happen to his disadvantage. He has no control over circumstances. Do you know why? Because God is overruling everything and seeing to it that Haman's plot does not succeed.